The committee will reconvene. I will call up the flood insurance bill. Clerk will designate the bill.
H.R. 5114.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading be dispensed with. The bill is before us, and the gentleman from California is recognized to offer a manager's amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 511. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5114, offered by...
Dispensed with, and the gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. H.R. 5114, the Flood Insurance Reform Priorities Act, would make much-needed reforms to the National Flood Insurance Program, which currently provides valuable protection for approximately 5.5 million homeowners. This bill is supported by the National Association of Realtors, the National Association of Home Builders, the American Insurance Association, the Property Casualty Insurers Association, and the Independent Insurance Agents and Brokers of America. I ask unanimous consent to enter the letters of support from these organizations into
without
the
objection.
record. One of the key reforms of this bill is a 5-year reauthorization of the flood insurance program. Such an authorization is critical to the program's success because the program has lapsed twice since the beginning of this year, for 2 days in March and for 18 days in April. These lapses meant that FEMA was not able to write new policies, renew expiring policies, or increase coverage limits. The bill also addresses the problems with the rollout of FEMA's new flood maps. Many homeowners nationwide have suddenly found themselves living in floodplains and subject to the mandatory purchase of flood insurance. Flood insurance can be expensive and can present an unexpected expense for homeowners. The bill would ease the burden on homeowners by providing a 5-year delay of the effective date of the maps and then providing a 5-year phase-in of actuarial rates. The manager's amendment, which I'm pleased to offer, makes further perfecting changes to this legislation. It would require notices to homeowners subject to the 5-year delay of maps and 5-year phase-in about the flood risk in the area and the availability of voluntary flood insurance, provide coverage for additional living expenses, allow homeowners to use insurance proceeds for demolition and rebuilding, and require the flood insurance advocate created in the bill to assist homeowners and communities in interpreting, implementing, and appealing flood maps and mandatory purchase requirements. I'm pleased that we were able to work in a bipartisan manner by incorporating suggestions from several members from the other side of the aisle, by including business interruption coverage at the suggestion of Mr. Bacchus, raising the minimum deductible for properties at the suggestion of Mr. Nagelbauer, and requiring a study on how FEMA will repay its flood insurance debt at the suggestion of Mr. Hinterling. Mr. Chairman, this manager's amendment includes many improvements to this very important bill, and I urge a yes vote on the amendment and the underlying legislation. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
I thank the chair. The Waters measure does include many positive reforms, including the elimination of subsidies over time for second homes and commercial properties that result in a positive step in the right direction. In addition, the manager's amendment includes additional reforms that seek to reduce the subsidies over time that continue to basically burden the program. We do know that this program, however, does continue to carry an $18 billion debt, and so fundamental reforms are long overdue. So we need a long-term, multi-year reauthorization with comprehensive and substantial reform. You know, the recent series of short-term extensions have resulted in 2 brief lapses that created uncertainty in the marketplace and negative consequences for home buyers trying to purchase a home. NFIB is seriously facing challenges, and the program cannot continue much longer on its current path. So reforms are needed to eliminate or phase out subsidies whenever we can, which will help reduce the shortfall and to protect the American taxpayer. So, in conclusion, on balance, this package of reform priorities is a positive step in the right direction because it tries to move us forward with the elimination of subsidized rates in several categories, including commercial properties, second homes, and properties that sustain repetitive losses, and it adds protection for taxpayers at a time when that is very much needed. And with that, I yield back to the chairman.
Question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from California. Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized to offer an amendment.
I have an amendment down the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R.
I ask unanimous consent that further reading be dispensed with. The gentleman.
Thanks. Back in 1968, NFIP was created with the intent of providing homeowners that live in floodplains the opportunity to purchase flood insurance from the federal government. At the time, there was really little opportunity to purchase flood insurance in the private market. And so it was created after many homeowners had already built their homes in flood-prone areas and before any comprehensive flood maps even existed. So because of this, Congress allowed the owners of these properties, that were known then and now as pre-firm properties, to purchase flood insurance from the federal government basically at subsidized rates. So over the last 20 years now, NFIP has been largely self-sufficient. Claims going out have basically equaled the receipts coming in. But with the devastating storm of Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita, the NFIP had to borrow over $20 billion to meet its contractual obligations and pay out the affected policyholders. So the underlying bill does, as I said a minute ago, make some significant reforms to the National Flood Insurance Program. It does this by increasing the phase-in of actual rates on vacation homes, second homes, non-residential properties and such, those that have been subsidized by the program since its very beginning. But even with these significant reforms, there are still a number of people on each side of the debate that feel other changes should be made. Now, some people have advocated for a total and immediate withdrawal of the subsidy of all these pre-firm homes, regardless of when they were purchased. Others believe that it's not fair to force someone who bought their home assuming one flood insurance rate, then having that rate change right in the middle of their mortgage. So, as I've done in the past, in an effort to find a compromise, if you will, between these two sides, I'm offering, once again, this common-sense middle ground amendment that would provide additional resources to the flood insurance program in a fair way and not subject the current homeowner of a pre-firm house to an unanticipated or unplanned increase in their flood insurance premiums. So what would it do? My amendment would require any purchaser of a pre-firm home, primary residence, to pay phased-in actuarial rates insurance policy prices using the same phase-in structure that non-residential and non-primary homes are currently subject to in this same bill. Now, you know, I've worked closely with the chairman over the last several years on similar problems and similar amendments and work on this area, and I know the chairman has been a steadfast supporter of working to try to eliminate the subsidies that we find in the underlying flood program. Variations of this amendment have been passed in both full houses, both back in 109th Congress and the 110th Congress. So, in conclusion, as I say, I believe this is really a common sense, practical approach, and it's a fair way to adequately bolster the program, but also to provide citizens the appropriate coverage to prepare for future disasters as well. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am pleased to rise in support of this amendment. I think it is fair, and I think it does give us an opportunity to help reduce the deficit. And I appreciate Mr. Garrett's work on this issue, and I think I would ask my colleagues to support it also.
Questions on the amendment? Those in favor will say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have the amendment agreed to. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized to offer an amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
07 or 08?
Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent that it be considered as read.
Mr. Scott, is it?
So which one, David?
Oh, it's
07 or 08?
07.
Clerk will designate amendment 07.
Amendment to H.R. 5114.
I ask unanimous consent the reading be dispensed with. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm sorry. Yes, it's 07, 007. Good number. I love the in memory of great James Bond. Mr. Chairman,
Recognized.
thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. This is a very, very important amendment, and it's an amendment that reflects a very serious concern within my constituency in Georgia. As you may remember, about 8 months ago, we had a devastating flood in my district in Georgia, the likes of which this nation has not seen in the past century. We lost hundreds and hundreds of homes, and we lost lives. We lost 10 lives, and of those 10 lives, 8 of them were in my district, and 7 from one county alone. And especially Douglas and Cobb counties in my district were extremely devastated. We had the President of the Vice President of the United States come down. We had the Secretary of Homeland Security to come down. And we have made a commitment to make sure that we can reach out and to help people in need. Members of the committee, what we have here now is a need to reach out and help the lower income people to be able to purchase their flood insurance in a way that they can afford. They will purchase it. But under the requirement, it mandates in order for you to rebuild your home, you have got to have the flood insurance. And you've got to pay for it in bulk and one lump sum. What my amendment does is to take into consideration the financial hardship that is already on these individuals who have lost everything. And it requires them to, yes, pay for their flood insurance, but allows them the opportunity to pay for that flood insurance on an installment basis. That's all it does, simply. And I ask for your favorable consideration of this very needed and much appreciated amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I have a second-degree amendment to Mr. Scott's amendment.
That's the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear. Clerk will designate the second-degree amendment.
Amendment offered by Ms. Spear of California to the amendment offered by Mr. Scott of Georgia.
The reading be dispensed with without objection. The gentlewoman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I fully agree with Mr. Scott that the current requirement that annual mandatory flood insurance premiums be paid in a single lump sum can be a real burden on poor and working class families who are already struggling to pay their mortgage, homeowners insurance, and other bills. Most insurance companies now allow consumers to pay their homeowners and auto insurance in installments, usually for a small fee. Particularly in these difficult economic times, we should allow homeowners to do the same. Mr. Scott's bill would allow anyone under 200% of the federal poverty level, about $44,000 for a family of four, to pay their flood insurance in monthly installments. In my district, a middle-class family of four needs about $84,000 to barely make ends meet. My amendment would allow families making up to 400% of the federal poverty rate to choose to pay their flood insurance by monthly installments. If we're going to make sure if we're going to make the insurance mandatory, we should not penalize those who are struggling, but allow them to include that premium in their monthly budgeting. I ask for your aye vote.
The gentleman from Georgia.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. With all due respect to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spears, my amendment and your amendment both have considerable merit. But I would be more appreciative of my amendment being able to travel alone because we have narrowly tailored my amendment to specifically affect the poor, those at just 200% or below poverty. I have no disregard for your concerns, and I understand the difference in terms of the income levels, but I'd have to oppose it and wish that my amendment be able to travel alone because it is particularly targeted for those people who are unemployed and have almost nothing, that have been devastated, don't have a job, or are underemployed, or don't even have an adult working in the family. Those that are in the greatest degree of need, and that is at 200% of poverty or below. So, again, with all due respect, I have to oppose your amendment to my amendment and respectfully request that we're able to move my amendment alone without yours.
Is there further discussion? The gentleman from California, Ms. Waters.
Thank you very much. Mr. Scott worked very closely with my staff on this amendment that would allow families with incomes at below 200% of the federal poverty line to pay for flood insurance premiums in monthly installments. Families at 200% of the federal poverty line are not affluent. For a family of four, 200% of the poverty line is about $45,000 a year. And we thought it was crucial for these families to be able to spread payments out over the course of the year rather than be hit with one lump sum charge. Usually, we're all in agreement about issues like this. This is a little bit different today, and I would strongly support Mr. Scott and reject the proposed amendment to raise that to 400%.
Will the gentlewoman yield?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. I would, I recognize that you've worked closely with Mr. Scott on this amendment. It's my understanding that my staff had worked with everyone, and if that wasn't the case, I'm sorry for that. I would just like to place another thought in our minds. There is such a lack of consumer protection. When you realize that you can pay for auto insurance, homeowners insurance, not based on your poverty level, but just because you want to pay on a monthly basis and for a small fee can pay on a monthly basis. I don't know why flood insurance should be any different. I mean, if I had my druthers, it wouldn't be 400% of poverty. It would be anyone who has a requirement to pay flood insurance. If they want to pay on an installment basis, they can do so for a small fee. I mean, I think under these economic times, everyone's in trouble financially. So with that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to speak in support of the Scott amendment because in Louisiana, we have a lot of persons. By the way, I'm from Louisiana. I represent a district in Texas. But we have persons in what I will identify and what has been properly identified as the lower Ninth Ward, many of whom owned their property, did not have any insurance because they owned the property and chose not to buy insurance. They are now going to have to reconstruct, and many of them are seniors, persons on fixed incomes, persons who are without question in need of this type of legislation. I'm speaking in support of not only the amendment, but of the people in the lower Ninth Ward, the people across the length and breadth of the country who are living at or near poverty, who can benefit from having the opportunity to pay for insurance on an installment plan. They're not asking for a handout. They're asking for an opportunity to have the insurance and pay for it on an installment basis. And I support the Scott amendment. Thank you, and I yield back.
I'm going to recognize myself to say, our staff on both sides advised me that one of the problems here is because they'd always assumed people were going to pay it up front, they say they have no way at this point, if they took installments, of being sure that it would carry through. And I think we can fix that. So I think ultimately there is an argument for the installment plan. Members obviously are always free to vote as they wish, but I wouldn't even try to influence everyone here. I will vote against the amendment of the gentleman from California at this point. But in the interim, before we get to the floor, I want to say to the flood insurance program, as I understand their objection, which the staff, which is generally very accurate, tells me, it is that they're afraid if they took an installment, people might sort of pay for flood season and then stop. You can't do that with your automobile or property insurance because once you've signed the contract, you're obligated, and you cannot unilaterally stop. It would seem to me an easy solution would be for us maybe to recraft this amendment when it gets to the floor and add an authority on the part of the flood insurance program to accept it as part of a binding deal and then go to installments. With that, I would, as I said, think I hadn't realized that was their objection. It doesn't seem to be a very substantial one. I think the argument for installments is a good one, but the gentleman, Georgia, has done the work so far. The gentleman from California, Ms. Waters. So I'd be inclined to go that way and then work with them in the future to see if we can alleviate their objection. I'll yield to the gentlewoman, Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I will withdraw the amendment.
I thank the gentlewoman, and we will all work together to see what their objection is because, yes, most of us pay our insurance in monthly installments. Apparently, there is this problem, and we might be able to cure that. I appreciate the gentleman from Georgia taking that initiative because we may be able to fix this. Is there, the amendment is withdrawn. The question on the amendment brought by the gentleman from Georgia. All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Gentleman from New York have an amendment?
Thank you.
Or she's just looking at me? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. It was earlier. Are there further amendments? Gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5114, Flood Insurance Reform Priorities Act.
I ask unanimous consent that the reading be dispensed with, and the gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Homeowners with relatively low mortgage balances are often required by banks to purchase the maximum amount of available flood insurance, despite the fact that the Flood Act only requires enough coverage to cover the mortgage balance. To homeowners, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Purchasing the maximum amount of flood insurance when flood damage nationally averages $25,000 to $30,000 does not, after a point, make a lot of sense, particularly for low-income Americans. This is particularly true for elderly homeowners on a fixed income who have paid down their mortgages for many years. In one example in my district, a senior citizen with just $17,000 remaining on her mortgage was required by her lender to purchase the maximum flood insurance policy of $250,000. It's true that some homeowners may be underinsured if they decide to buy the minimum limit coverage. However, there are also homeowners who are likely to be increasingly creditworthy, and they discharge their primary debts. Even in our distressed housing market, and certainly over the long run, homeowners have other reasonable alternatives to paying high premiums to an insurance company for coverage they will never need. My amendment would make it a violation subject to penalty for a lender whose only interest in the property is the amount of the outstanding mortgage indebtedness to require a homeowner to purchase more than the legally required amount of flood insurance, an amount equal to the outstanding principal balance of the loan. Nothing would prohibit a homeowner who wished to purchase coverage up to the maximum for doing so, but it should be the homeowner's choice based on their own situation. This is a nationally mandated program with specific requirements. In states like California with mandatory auto insurance, once a car owner has discharged the debt on the car, they are not obligated to carry coverage for damage to their own car, only to damages they may cause to others. It may be imprudent depending on the value of the vehicle, but it is their choice, and I ask you to support the same rights for homeowners.
Gentlewoman yield.
I do.
I just want to thank her for bringing this forward, and let's be very clear to people. It does not say that the private insurer cannot charge more if it wants to charge more. It cannot do that, as I understand it, in a way that blames falsely the National Flood Insurance Program. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I didn't understand your question.
My understanding is that what this deals with is inaccurate efforts to blame the National Flood Insurance Program. It does not restrict the general right of insurance companies to charge, subject to state law, what they would charge.
Correct. Yeah. But it does provide that the homeowner only needs to cover up to the indebtedness they have on their mortgage.
Oh,
under the flood insurance
different amendment
program.
Then. Let me double check.
What was his question?
I apologize. Yeah, I listened too quickly. Right. As I understand it, the flood insurance program requires you to be insured up to the level of your mortgage. If a private insurance company wants to sell you more and you are willing to buy it, that's okay, but they can't allege to you that you are required to do that by flood insurance.
Correct.
So that stops anyone from putting pressure on you to go beyond what the flood insurance program wants. It does not prevent a genuine, legitimate arm's length deal.
That's correct.
Is there further debate? If not, the question is on the amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have the amendment. Is agreed to. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Maffei, is recognized for an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk, and I ask for its immediate consideration.
027 or 027?
Gentleman will designate the amendment. Which amendment?
Yes, it is it was 027.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5114.
I ask unanimous consent the amendment be considered as read. Without objection, so ordered. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an amendment that would take all of the new maps being drawn up by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and remove the requirement that the properties in those maps be required to buy the mandate that they buy flood insurance. I admit this is a somewhat radical solution to a problem that I have not found a less radical solution to. So I may ask the chairman and the senior members if they have any other ideas to present them. But the problem is that we've gotten some of these new maps, which are downright absurd. In my district, we've been inundated, no pun intended, with calls about these new areas included by FEMA. Approximately 2,400 parcels in the Syracuse area will soon be required to purchase flood insurance if we do not have an amendment like mine. Many of these are, by the way, very low-income areas. About 1,000 of these newly included parcels are in low-income areas of the city of Syracuse, where many residents currently live below the poverty line. There's no particular evidence that there's been any flooding in these areas, or in fact, that they would ever be subject to flood. For example, I personally covered the blizzard of 1993 when I was a television reporter, where Syracuse had received almost 4 feet of snow in a 48-hour window. After that, we had major flooding in upstate New York, and yet no flooding whatsoever in any of these areas, which would have been included in there. Now, the problem is that if there was some way to appeal these maps, because let's say I'm wrong, and I could be wrong, of course, but let's say if I'm wrong, clearly it's possible that you would have maps drawn by the Federal Emergency Management Agency that do not necessarily include areas in actual floodplains. But there seems to be almost no way to appeal these maps once they're done. FEMA stated that they put in, or buried in our local newspaper, some sort of a notice. It wasn't noticed by my office. It was also not noticed by the city or the county, or for that matter, anyone else. Now they say, oh, it's too late. We can't do much of anything. That concerns me a great deal, Mr. Chairman, particularly because I'm also concerned that the Federal Emergency Management Agency, though an agency of the federal government, may actually have a conflict of interest here in that in their attempt to address some of their $18 billion debt, they may be looking for areas where they can charge premiums where there's so little likelihood that there'd actually be a flood that they would be able to do this. So I'm clearly looking for a way to have some leverage over them, but this amendment would do it, because at least then these new areas, some of which, by the way, again, I repeat, are in the poorest areas of the city, the predominantly African-American south side of Syracuse, where folks cannot, I mean, I realize maybe it wouldn't be a high premium, but I don't believe that people here would be able to afford their homes even if a small premium was included. With the gentleman from California.
Thank you very much.
I yield to the gentleman from.
I'll recognize you on our own time.
Okay. Then I would reserve the balance.
No, you can't do that.
You can't do that. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Members, I'm very sympathetic to the gentleman's argument, and we've had complaints from any number of places, including in my own district, and the community organized, and I work with them to challenge FEMA, and they withdrew maps. So there are areas where it is questionable whether or not they are in floodplains and should be. The remapping, as is being done by FEMA, should not be done. And so what we thought we would do, and what we are doing with this bill, is we are delaying all that new mapping for 5 years, and then we are phasing in the next 5 years. But if you have a particular problem in an area in your district, we'll be happy to work with you and FEMA to try and get those maps withdrawn.
I thank, will the gentlewoman yield?
Yes, I yield.
I thank the gentlewoman from California, the subcommittee chair. My only concern, and I will co-sponsor the next amendment with the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Spear, but my concern is only that putting these off, while much, much better than just having them take effect immediately, still doesn't necessarily address whether the maps ever should have been, these areas should have been included in the maps in the first place. But if the gentlewoman and the senior members of the committee would be willing to work with us before we come to the floor to maybe figure out some way that we can make sure that we do have some recourse here, I would be happy to withdraw the amendment.
Certainly, I'd be happy to work with you.
Mr.
If the
Chairman?
gentleman would yield, I would also, I have had some concern in my own district, although a subsequent flood in some of those areas abated some of the concern. The gentleman from California yield to the gentleman from New York?
Yes, I yield.
I don't know the answer to this, but in my hometown, we're nowhere near the water, but over the last couple of years, because our water table apparently is extremely high, we've had heavy rains, and a number of the homes have been flooded out. So I'm just wondering if that fits into what FEMA has been trying to do in certain areas where they've had flooding, even though they're not near the water. I don't know the answer to this, but it might be something that you might want to look into. Yield back.
Absolutely, and the maps are not necessarily drawn based on your proximity to the water. It is the water tables and whether or not there are barriers to flooding such as railroad tracks or other kinds of things. And my constituents went out and they measured curb levels. They just did some extraordinary work, and we discovered that there was no danger of flooding there at all. And so we got them withdrawn, and we'll be happy to continue to work with all of our members to make sure that we do everything that we can to prevent incorrect mapping.
Yeah. Would the gentlewoman yield?
Yes.
Well, I very much appreciate her desire and the chairman of the full committee's desire to work with us. I still am concerned about the Federal Emergency Management Agency, for lack of a better word, being in a conflict of interest in that they're having to raise their own the money to pay for these back costs. But nonetheless, I will ask unanimous consent to withdraw this particular amendment.
Actually, in the committee, unanimous consent is not needed.
I withdraw the amendment.
Is withdrawn. Gentleman, New York has a second amendment?
Yes, I have a second amendment I'd like to offer.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment to H.R. 5114.
I ask unanimous consent the reading be dispensed with. The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. I offer this amendment on behalf of myself and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Spear. What this does is it basically takes the 5-year delay that the chairwoman from California, Ms. Waters, was talking about, and just makes sure that it is retroactive to September 1st, 2008, any maps that would take effect then. Part of the reason for this is there's a concern that maps might be rushed through in some of our areas where there have been complaints or something like that. So if they were rushed through before this bill took effect, they might not be subject to the 5-year delay. This is actually a pretty simple amendment just to make sure that, in the interest of fairness, that there'll be a 5-year delay on all of the maps that have taken effect on or after September 1st, 2008. And I would yield to the gentleman. She's not here. Okay, I would yield. Can I? Yeah. The gentleman from New York want to speak at his own time.
Yeah, please.
Okay. With that, I will yield back the balance of my time.
The question is on the amendment. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise today in support of Mr. Maffei's amendment. Well, I appreciate that this bill makes reforms to the flood insurance program that will assess payments based on risk. I share my colleagues' concern about the abrupt and staggering increases that our constituents are forced to deal with. Even after months of negotiations with FEMA, I still have several communities in my district that have been recently upgraded in the flood map or in the process of being included. It does not make sense to them or to me why they suddenly see their new costs rise from $300 to, in some cases, $2,000 annually. Too often, Washington bureaucracies do not understand the impact that its rules and mandates have on communities and families in Western New York and across this country, and that surely needs to change. This amendment would ensure that these newly mapped or upgraded risk areas have a reasonable amount of time to engage with the National Flood Insurance Program, discuss issues of concern, and comply with the mandates of the program. It's simply unfair to expect homeowners in small communities to pay vastly higher flood insurance rates seemingly overnight and deny them an opportunity to discuss these new maps and rates with the program. And with that, I would yield back.
Is there further discussion? The gentleman from California.
Yes, I would oppose moving the effective date to September 1st, 2008. We work very closely with members on both sides of the aisle, and I think the 5-year period of time is most credible. And I would just ask the members to support the work of the staff, working with the staffs on both sides of the aisle to support the 5-year period of time rather than moving the time period back.
And the question now is on the amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Opposed, no. The noes have it. The gentleman from New York requests a recorded vote.
I request a roll call.
Those joining with him will signify. A recorded vote is ordered. Are there further amendments to the bill? If not, I move the previous question. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The previous question passes. And we will now recess. We have a series of votes on the two bills, the FHA bill and the National Catastrophic Program. We will take those votes immediately following the last votes on the floor, which we anticipate is sometime after 4 o'clock. And we will we will take those votes at that time. We had tentatively held tomorrow. We will not need it now. We will reconvene next week for a markup on two housing bills, the Choice Neighborhoods Act and the Housing Preservation Act. I appreciate the serious and expeditious way in which we've been able to do some important legislation, and we are now in recess until immediately after the conclusion of the last series of votes on the floor of the House.